Have you ever wondered why some people always seem to have control over you, even when you know something feels off? Why you end up doing things you never wanted to, just to keep their approval? Deep down you can sense it. A quiet manipulation that twists your emotions, makes you question your worth, and leaves you feeling powerless. You tell yourself it's love or care or just keeping the peace, but what it really is the slow erosion of your strength. Manipulation doesn't start with control. It starts with confusion. It begins when you start doubting your own intuition, when her words make you feel guilty for having boundaries, when you're made to feel selfish for wanting respect. It's subtle, quiet, and psychological. She doesn't take your power by force. She convinces you to give it away. And the moment you surrender your inner authority, she owns your emotions. You stop leading your own life and start reacting to hers. The truth is, no one can manipulate a man who knows himself. Manipulation feeds on uncertainty, survives where there's self-doubt, emotional dependence, and the fear of losing validation. If you constantly seek approval, you become vulnerable to emotional control, because the manipulator doesn't need to change you, she only needs to control what you crave. Attention, love, acceptance. The moment she realizes you need those things from her, she becomes the source of your peace and she can take it away anytime she wants. To stop being manipulated, you must first recognize the invisible trade happening beneath the surface. Every time you chase her approval, you're trading your power for her attention. Every time you silence your truth to avoid conflict, you're trading your authenticity for temporary comfort. Every time you overextend yourself just to prove your worth, you're trading your self-respect for the illusion of love. This is how men lose themselves, not in one big fall, but in small emotional compromises that go unnoticed until they've become habits. But here's what you must remember. Your value is not determined by how much you're willing to give to be loved. It's defined by how deeply you stand in your truth, even when it costs you someone's approval. Strength isn't about being hard or emotionless. It's about having emotional clarity, knowing what you feel, what you believe, and what you stand for without letting anyone distort it for their gain. When you stop reacting emotionally to every word, every silence, every little test, you reclaim your power. You begin to see manipulation for what it is, an attempt to control your response. But when you no longer react from insecurity, you become unshakable. You no longer fall for guilt trips, emotional traps, or silent treatments. You stop playing the emotional game entirely because you've elevated beyond it. If you stay until the end of this video, you'll understand not only how to recognize manipulation, but how to completely break free from it. You'll see how to rebuild your inner strength, redefine your boundaries, and become a man no one can emotionally control again. Because this is not about anger or revenge. It's about awakening. It's about stepping back into the power you were born with but forgot you had. And once you reclaim it, no one, not her, not anyone, will ever have the power to manipulate your mind, your heart, or your peace again. The reason manipulation feels so powerful is because it targets the deepest parts of your psychology, your desire to be understood, appreciated, and loved. Every human being craves connection, but when that craving turns into dependency, it becomes the perfect entry point for control. She doesn't have to raise her voice or make demands. All she has to do is make you question whether you're good enough for her, and when you start proving your worth instead of living it, you've already stepped into her frame. That's the silent battle men lose every day. Not because they're weak, but because they've been trained to seek validation through service, approval, and sacrifice. Society taught you that being a good man means always pleasing, always fixing, always putting her needs above your own. But no one told you that this endless giving, when not rooted in self-respect, becomes self-destruction. Manipulation thrives where there's imbalance. The more you give without boundaries, the more you teach others how to take without limit. True power begins when you stop trying to prove your value and start embodying it. A man who knows his worth doesn't need to argue for respect. His silence commands it, his presence defines it, his actions reflect it. But that level of strength comes from within, from emotional self-mastery. And self-mastery starts with awareness. When you become aware of your emotional triggers, the guilt, the fear of rejection, the need for approval, you start to see the invisible strings being pulled. You realize manipulation isn't about her words, it's about your reactions to them. When she withdraws affection, do you panic? When she gives silent treatment, do you chase? When she blames you for her emotions, do you apologize just to end the discomfort? Every time you do, you're teaching your nervous system that her approval equals peace. You become addicted to her attention because it soothes the very insecurity she helped create. That's how emotional control is built, not through force, but through conditioning. But the moment you recognize that cycle, you can break it. You break it by no longer needing her reaction to define your reality. You stop letting her emotions dictate your behavior. You learn to sit in discomfort without losing composure. That's how your power returns, quietly, firmly, unshakably. Because now your peace comes from within, not from her response. You stop explaining yourself to be understood. You stop chasing closure that will never come. You start acting from self-respect instead of emotional panic. Understand this. You can love deeply and still have boundaries. You can care without being controlled. You can give without losing yourself. Love without power balance is not love. It's emotional servitude. And no matter how beautiful the connection feels, if it costs you your self-respect, it will eventually destroy your spirit. The moment you choose peace over approval, the manipulation begins to crumble. You'll notice how the same words that used to break you now mean nothing. The guilt trips lose their power. The emotional chaos no longer shakes you. You rise above the game entirely because your identity no longer depends on her validation. That is when you become untouchable, not because you stopped feeling, but because you stopped begging to be seen. When you finally realize that your worth was never hers to give or take, you walk in a power no one can ever manipulate again. The hardest part about breaking free from manipulation is not walking away from the person. It's walking away from the version of yourself that tolerated it. The part of you that kept hoping things would change. The part that wanted to be loved so badly you accepted pain disguised as affection. That's the emotional prison most people never escape. Because even after you see the manipulation clearly, part of you still wants to believe in the illusion. You keep thinking if you just do more, give more, explain better, she'll finally see your worth. But manipulation doesn't end through effort. It ends through awakening. You must confront the truth that not everyone who says they care about you actually wants you strong. Some only want you dependent, compliant, predictable. They thrive on your emotional reactions because it confirms their control. Every argument, every guilt trip, every dramatic silence, it's all designed to pull you back into emotional chaos where they can dictate the rules. But when you rise above that chaos, when you refuse to play the emotional tug-of-war, something powerful happens. Their control collapses. Because manipulation cannot survive clarity. Clarity is your shield. It's the calm awareness that sees through the performance and refuses to participate in it. When she tries to provoke guilt, you stay grounded. When she tries to make you prove yourself, you choose silence. When she withholds affection to test you, you remain unmoved. That's not coldness, it's self-respect. And self-respect is the one thing manipulators cannot handle because it exposes their game. It takes away the emotional leverage they depend on. Most men lose themselves because they confuse emotional intensity with connection. The highs feel addictive, the attention, the validation, the moments of affection after the chaos. It feels like love, but it's not. It's control wrapped in emotion. Real connection brings peace, not anxiety. It empowers you. It doesn't drain you. If you constantly feel the need to prove your place in someone's life, You're not in love. You're in psychological survival mode. And that is exactly where manipulation thrives. The shift begins when you no longer chase emotional highs, when you choose stability over drama. When you decide that peace, silence, and solitude are better than being in a relationship where you're constantly made to feel less. Because peace is not boring. Peace is power. Peace is the space where your mind becomes clear enough to hear your own truth again. And in that silence, something inside you awakens. A deep, unshakable self-trust that says, I don't need to beg for what I deserve. Ibra, from that moment, you stop reacting and start observing. You stop needing explanations from those who intentionally confuse you. You stop trying to heal people who enjoy hurting you. You begin protecting your energy as if your life depends on it, because it does. Your energy defines your reality. When you no longer waste it on proving your worth, it naturally flows toward growth, strength, and purpose. Every time you choose silence over chaos, you're rewiring your mind. Every time you hold your ground instead of chasing validation, you're teaching your nervous system what safety truly feels like. And soon you'll realize that the power they once had over you was never real. It existed only in the parts of you that didn't yet know your strength. Once you awaken to that truth, manipulation dies instantly. Because no one can control a man who has learned to master his own peace. You begin to understand that real power doesn't come from dominating anyone. It comes from mastering yourself. The men who cannot be manipulated are not cold or emotionless. They are emotionally disciplined. They have learned to feel everything deeply, but respond only from clarity, not impulse. They've trained their minds to pause before reacting, to see through emotional games instead of being dragged into them. That pause, that space between stimulus and response, is where your true freedom lives. It's the place where you stop being controlled by emotion and start directing it. Manipulators feed on chaos. They want you to lose control, to act out of fear, guilt, or desperation. Because when you do, they win. But when you remain centered, when you respond with calm certainty, the entire game collapses. You strip away their control because you no longer supply the emotional fuel that keeps manipulation alive. You stop dancing to the rhythm of their moods. You stop bending your values just to keep them pleased. You stop apologizing for who you are. And in that moment, you reclaim your life. Self-control is not suppression, it's precision. It's knowing what deserves your energy and what doesn't. It's the power to walk away from chaos without explaining yourself. It's the strength to let people misunderstand you while you remain grounded in your truth. The manipulator's greatest weapon is your emotional reaction. The moment you stop giving it, they lose their grip completely. You start noticing how peace feels more fulfilling than attention. How walking alone feels lighter than walking with someone who constantly drains your spirit. You stop seeing silence as loneliness and start seeing it as strength. That's where your masculine core begins to reawaken. The part of you that leads, that protects your boundaries, that moves with quiet confidence, not from arrogance, but from alignment. Because when your actions, words, and values align, you become impossible to control. Every time you stay calm when someone tries to provoke you, you're rewiring your subconscious. You're teaching your mind that it doesn't need external validation to feel secure. You begin to replace emotional dependency with self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of real confidence. The kind that doesn't need to be loud, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. It simply exists, unshakable, undeniable. The truth is, manipulation only thrives where there is emotional confusion. Once your intentions become clear, once your boundaries become firm, manipulation dies naturally. Because when a man truly knows himself, no one can tell him who he is. When he knows his values, no one can guilt him into betraying them. When he knows his worth, no one can make him beg for love. That's the quiet revolution that happens within. A complete shift from seeking power outside to realizing it's been inside you all along. And when that realization sinks in, your energy changes. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer argue, you lead. You no longer fear being alone because solitude has become your sanctuary, not your punishment. That's when people start treating you differently. Not because they've changed, but because your energy commands respect. And that respect isn't demanded. It's earned through the calm strength of a man who no longer negotiates his peace for anyone's approval. The moment you stop allowing emotional manipulation to dictate your actions, something profound begins to happen. You start to see people's intentions with absolute clarity. You begin to recognize patterns that once confused you. The charm, the guilt, the sudden withdrawal of affection, the shifting tones, all of it becomes transparent. You realize it was never about love. It was about control. And once you see control for what it is, it can no longer rule you. That awareness alone changes everything. Because awareness creates choice. And choice is freedom. Before awareness, you were reacting unconsciously, driven by fear of loss or the hunger for validation. But now, every response comes from strength, not insecurity. You no longer operate on emotional autopilot. You take back the steering wheel of your life. You start choosing peace instead of chaos, clarity instead of confusion, and truth instead of illusion. And that is where your evolution begins. Not by fighting manipulation, but by transcending it. When you rise above emotional games, you start valuing energy exchange. You start asking, does this connection feed my spirit or drain it? You no longer chase intensity that burns you out. You crave peace that fuels your growth. And soon, your standards shift. You no longer entertain people who make you question your worth. You no longer justify disrespect in the name of love. You stop arguing with anyone who benefits from your confusion. Because your time, your energy, and your emotional space are sacred. You finally realize that giving access to your heart is a privilege, not a right. This shift doesn't just protect you from manipulation, it transforms you into someone magnetic. Because confidence born from self-respect radiates differently. People sense it. They feel it in your tone, your silence, your posture. You don't need to prove anything anymore. Your presence speaks louder than your words. You move through the world with quiet authority, and those who once tried to manipulate you either rise to meet your energy or fall away on their own. That's the natural law of alignment. What no longer matches your frequency simply cannot stay. But remember, strength without compassion becomes hardness. The goal is not to build walls, but to build standards. You don't need to close your heart to protect it. You just need to guard it with wisdom. Real power isn't about shutting down. It's about seeing clearly and choosing consciously. You can still love deeply, but now you love from abundance, not fear. You no longer give to be chosen. You give because you already are whole. And that wholeness changes everything. It changes how you speak, how you move, how you love. You start leading with presence instead of need. You stop chasing people who don't meet your peace. You become grounded, calm, and unshakable. And that calmness is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength, because it means your emotions serve you, not control you. When you reach that level of inner clarity, manipulation doesn't even register anymore. You don't have to resist it, because it simply doesn't resonate with who you are. The games that once consumed you now feel irrelevant. You're no longer seeking to prove your value, you're embodying it. You've stepped into the kind of strength that doesn't need to be seen to be known. The kind of power that doesn't shout, it simply exists. And that's when you finally understand freedom is not found in controlling others, but in mastering yourself so deeply that no one can ever control you again. When you stop being controlled by external forces, a new kind of silence enters your life. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of power. You begin to notice how peaceful strength feels. You no longer react to every emotional pull, every sudden change in tone, every guilt-laced message. Instead, you breathe, you observe, you remain centered. That calmness unsettles manipulators because they can no longer find the buttons to press. They search for the emotional openings that once existed, but now they find none. You've sealed every leak where your power used to drain away. That inner stillness is not passive, it's presence. It's awareness sharpened into strength. When you live from presence, you're no longer trapped in the chaos of what others feel or expect. You begin to see reality as it is, not as someone wants you to perceive it. You start discerning the difference between love that uplifts and love that confines, between connection that inspires and connection that controls. And with every realization, your energy becomes cleaner, your mind sharper, your decisions stronger. You start realizing that manipulation can only work when there's emotional confusion within you. Once you make peace with your truth, there's no weakness left to exploit. You no longer chase validation because you've learned that approval is temporary, but self-respect is eternal. You no longer beg to be chosen because you understand that you were never meant to be chosen by everyone. You were meant to be aligned with those who see your worth without needing to be convinced. That's the shift from emotional dependency to emotional mastery. And it's the birth of a new identity. This identity is not built on fear of being hurt. It's built on trust in your own strength. It's not defensive, it's discerning. You can still feel deeply, but you no longer drown in those feelings. You can still care, but not at the cost of your dignity. You can still love, but now you love from clarity instead of desperation. That's what true maturity looks like. Not hardness, but balance. You become a man who leads with peace, because you've conquered the chaos within. When you reach this place, the way you experience relationships changes forever. You stop being addicted to intensity and start being drawn to authenticity. You no longer mistake drama for passion or manipulation for depth. You start valuing emotional safety, not because you're weak, but because peace allows you to grow, build, and thrive. You finally understand that love without respect is just control in disguise, and you would rather walk alone in peace than walk with someone who confuses love with power. This is what emotional evolution feels like. Quiet, steady, and deeply liberating. You stop reacting, and you start choosing. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to change those who refuse to grow. You accept that not everyone deserves access to your heart, and that boundaries are not barriers. They're bridges to self-respect. Every time you say no to manipulation, you're saying yes to your higher self. And that version of you, calm, self-assured, unwavering, becomes your new foundation. You no longer chase peace because you are peace. You no longer seek validation because you embody confidence. You've learned that strength isn't about controlling others, it's about mastering your own emotional world so deeply that no one can enter it without your permission. That's the kind of power no one can take from you. It's the kind that radiates without effort, the kind that commands respect without a word spoken. When you reach the point where peace becomes your natural state, you begin to understand that strength is not about resistance, it's about alignment. You no longer need to fight manipulation because it can no longer find a place to live inside you. The games that once pulled you apart lose their power because there's nothing left within you that responds to them. Your emotions are still alive, but they are no longer slaves to other people's tactics. You feel, but you don't crumble. You care, but you don't chase. You love, but you don't lose yourself. That's the highest form of mastery, to remain soft in heart yet unshakable in spirit. This level of inner control doesn't make you detached, it makes you free. You finally realize that emotional freedom isn't about isolating yourself from people. It's about no longer needing them to define you. You stop tying your worth to how someone sees you, speaks to you, or treats you. You understand that people only project what they carry, and their inability to value you says nothing about your value. That realization alone dismantles manipulation at its core, because guilt, shame, and fear only work when you doubt your worth. Once you stand firmly in it, no one can touch your peace. You start moving through the world with quiet certainty. You no longer explain your boundaries, you embody them. You no longer justify your distance, your energy does it for you. You no longer argue for respect. Your self-respect commands it. You realize that manipulation requires engagement, and the moment you stop participating, it dies. The power was never in the manipulator's hands. It was always in your reactions. You were never weak. You were just unaware of how much authority you had over your own mind. The greatest illusion of manipulation is that you need the other person to give you closure, validation, or peace. But the truth is, you are the only source of all three. Closure comes the moment you stop needing answers from those who thrive on confusion. Validation comes when you accept yourself fully, even when no one claps. Peace comes when you stop seeking it in temporary emotions and start cultivating it from within. The more you anchor yourself in these truths, the more powerful you become, not over others, but over your own energy. And when your energy shifts, everything else follows. You attract people who respect your boundaries because you respect them yourself. You draw in relationships built on clarity, not control. You connect with those who inspire growth, not chaos. The manipulative ones naturally fade away, not because you fought them, but because you evolved beyond their reach. You've stepped into a frequency where games cannot exist. Only truth can survive. This is what true masculinity feels like. Not dominance, not control, but calm power. A quiet knowing of who you are and what you stand for. The ability to walk away with grace, to remain grounded in storms, to lead yourself before leading anyone else. That is the essence of strength, self-command, not control over others. Because once you master yourself, you no longer fear losing anyone. You realize the only thing you ever needed to hold on to was your own peace. That realization transforms everything. You become untouchable, not because you build walls, but because your energy stands as a mirror, reflecting truth, rejecting manipulation, and radiating self-respect. You move differently, you speak differently, you love differently. And from that place of clarity, you finally understand that real power isn't about never being manipulated again. It's about never being available for manipulation again. The most powerful realization comes when you see that manipulation was never about the other person's strength. It was about your unawareness of your own. Every guilt trip, every emotional game, every silent withdrawal was a mirror showing you where you had yet to master yourself. The pain wasn't punishment, it was guidance. It was life revealing where your peace could be stolen, where your emotions could be controlled, and where your worth was still tied to external approval. Once you understand that, manipulation no longer feels like betrayal. It feels like awakening. It becomes the pressure that forged your strength. You begin to look back and see that every moment you were tested emotionally was an invitation to rise higher. Every time someone tried to make you doubt yourself, it was a lesson in self-trust. Every time you were made to feel not enough, it was an opportunity to see that you already were. And that is how growth hides inside pain, disguised as rejection, disguised as loss, disguised as confusion. But beneath it all, it was pushing you toward one truth, that your value doesn't require permission, and your peace doesn't require validation. The more you embrace this truth, the less reactive you become. You start recognizing manipulation as nothing more than emotional noise, the desperate attempt of others to find control where they lack it within themselves. You stop taking it personally. You stop giving energy to people who thrive on emotional reactions. Instead, you remain calm, observant, and unmoved. You respond from awareness, not emotion. You choose dignity over drama, silence over pleading, and truth over temporary relief. And each time you do, your emotional armor strengthens. Not the kind that hardens you, but the kind that frees you. That freedom changes the way you move through life. You stop trying to convince anyone of your worth. You stop explaining your boundaries to those committed to crossing them. You stop making excuses for staying where peace does not exist. You realize that walking away is not weakness, it's wisdom. You understand that letting go is not giving up, it's rising above. And in that rise, you rediscover yourself, not the version shaped by fear or approval, but the one guided by purpose, presence, and power. When you reach this level of clarity, people can no longer use love as a weapon against you. They can no longer twist your compassion into guilt. They can no longer confuse your kindness for submission. You've learned the rarest form of strength, gentle power, the kind that loves without losing control, the kind that gives without being drained, the kind that forgives but never forgets the lesson. You carry that strength in your voice, in your silence, in your choices. The world around you begins to shift. The chaos that once followed you fades because it no longer finds resonance within you. You attract honesty, peace, and alignment because that's the energy you now embody. Your life stops being about reacting to others and starts being about creating from your truth. And that is where the real transformation begins, when you no longer fight for control, but live in such deep self-command that no one can disturb your balance. This is where freedom truly lives, not in being untouched by manipulation, but in being untouchable by it. You've evolved beyond it, risen above it, and reclaimed the one thing that was always yours: your power to choose peace over control, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over approval. Once you reclaim your inner authority, the world begins to look different. You start to see how much of what you once called love was actually fear wearing a mask. Fear of being alone, fear of being unchosen, fear of not being enough. You realize that manipulation only ever worked because you were still trying to earn love instead of embodying it. You thought connection meant sacrifice, when in truth, real connection is mutual. It never demands you shrink to be accepted. It never asks you to trade your authenticity for approval. What once looked like affection now reveals itself as dependency, and what once felt like loss now feels like liberation. That liberation feels quiet at first, almost unsettling. The silence after chaos can be confusing. You might question your strength because peace feels unfamiliar, but that discomfort is growth. It's your nervous system recalibrating to a higher standard of self-worth. You're no longer addicted to emotional intensity, you're learning to find fulfillment in balance. You stop mistaking stillness for emptiness and begin recognizing it as presence. You start realizing that you don't need noise to feel alive. You need alignment. Alignment means your actions, your emotions, and your values move as one. You no longer say yes when your soul means no. You no longer suppress your intuition just to keep someone close. You listen to that inner voice, the one that whispers when something feels off, the one you used to ignore to avoid conflict. That voice is your compass. It's the truth that never stops speaking, even when manipulation tried to drown it out. The more you trust it, the stronger it becomes. And soon it becomes impossible for anyone to mislead you, because your inner guidance system has been reactivated. This new awareness changes the way you love. You stop looking for partners to complete you because you are already whole. You stop seeking relationships for validation and begin seeking them for expansion. Love becomes a space of mutual growth, not emotional control. You give from overflow, not from emptiness. You become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of self-respect. Because when you truly value your peace, you don't gamble it for temporary pleasure or shallow validation. You protect it like sacred ground. And as your energy elevates, something extraordinary happens. You no longer attract manipulation because you no longer vibrate at its level. You radiate self-trust, and that frequency repels chaos. You stop being drawn to people who drain you because your soul finally understands that peace is not negotiable. You walk differently, speak differently, and carry yourself with a kind of calm that no one can fake. You've learned the language of emotional sovereignty, the ability to choose yourself without apology. There will still be tests. People will try to provoke the old you, the one who used to chase validation and silence intuition. But now, you meet those moments with awareness instead of reaction. You no longer need to prove your strength, you simply live it. You no longer seek closure, your clarity is your closure. And when manipulation tries to whisper again, you smile, because you recognize the voice that once deceived you. It no longer has power because you've outgrown its reach. This is the essence of true transformation. Not the absence of challenge, but the mastery of response. You've become the calm in your own storm, the authority of your emotions, and the guardian of your peace. And in that state of being, no one can pull you back into the old patterns of control, because the man you've become no longer fits inside the cage he once mistook for love.